The Process, a podcast about creativity and experimental music. In the world of experimental music, outcomes and accolades for creators can be uncertain and at times seem far and few between. Therefore, creators and practitioners of experimental music must embrace the one thing they will always have complete control over: the process. This podcast aims to understand this creative process by listening to new works and discussing them with their creators. Each episode focuses on one creator and their music. Understanding how and why they create can inform aspiring creatives and help audiences better understand and navigate experimental music. I'm Dr. Doug Bielmeyer, and I'll be your host as we explore the world of experimental music, creativity, and the human need to find purpose in their world and lives. This is The Process. Hi everyone, I'm Dr. Doug Bielmeyer. Welcome back to The Process. On today's episode, we'll be speaking with Lola De La Mata about her new album, Oceans on Azimuth. We'll listen to a specific track, Earthworms, and we'll talk about it in the third section of the podcast, where we talk about the recording session she and Gwendolyn Reed on double bass did at Air Studios with Eve Morris as sort of an improvisatory kind of miking technique, studio sort of magic session where Lola was actually able to go and take a lot of the recording and sort of further twist it and modify it to turn it into something that she describes as a piece that's sort of unperformable but is sort of created out of this improvised performance. So without further ado, let's take a listen to Earthworms from Oceans on Azimuth, Lola's brand new album, out everywhere, streaming everywhere. There's also a record version. Let's listen to a little bit of Earthworms.
Oh, interesting. So you see your creative process starting once you've kind of accumulated some material.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, So the field recordings or the other recordings I've done, I'm not considering that the creative process. That's like the collection process. Yeah. It's like taxonomy. It's different. Yeah.
Okay, so maybe I start with this. It's a bit of an odd one. So I used to be a weaver. Well, that's what I studied. And I thought I would engage with that for a longer period. Right. And the way that you weave, you have to prepare so many steps ahead before you even get into the making, into the warping and weaving. And it's all a calculation, it's all a grid. And in fact, you write yourself a score and you even measure out the distance, you know.
How long is the piece going to be? Yeah.
Just so that you can measure the warp on onto the loom. And
Hmm.
so you're actually counting your meters or your kilometers,
Right, right.
depending on how long you want this
Once
to
it's
be.
a kilometer
Um,
long, yeah,
and
project.
you're and well, obviously you've got the
Hmm.
there and back, I guess, of the
Right.
thread. So it's actually incredibly long.
Long. Okay. I
Um,
see.
um, and and that's before you even start constructing your fibers that you're going to weave with.
Right. Right.
And so what's really exciting is obviously you can plan everything and you might have decided on which kind of structures you're going to build, and there's a natural rhythm to that. You have
Mm.
to follow through in order to find it.
Right.
But then me being me, I would stick random things in there.
Yeah.
It was actually really difficult for me to follow the plan that I had set for myself. And so
Sure.
it's where the creative process starts is a bit of an ambiguous kind
That
of
sounds like my creative
question.
process. I think I'm making an Afghan, but in the end, it turns into something very, very different. So, do you consider all that preparation that you did, like in weaving? Do you consider that like in your creative process? Do you consider that part of the creative process, or is that all preparation and planning?
No, for me, it's part of it because it's you've already made the consideration that you will be doing something.
Something.
Um, and without it, there is nothing creative that can
Right.
take place. Like
Right.
it's almost like the setting of the stage or
Sure.
something.
Sure.
So uh or even like lighting the stage ready for you to kind of
Right.
know
Right.
what
Yeah.
kind of environment you're going to inhabit. So
Yeah.
yeah, so for me it's in a sense it's kind of environment
Yeah.
creation.
Yeah.
Um,
So
um,
so then let's zoom way out, way out.
yeah,
What actually creates the spark to say, "Hey, I'm going to weave something or I'm going to create a piece?" Like what usually inspires you to just decide, like you said, to create something?
usually
Mhm.
friction.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there needs to be some element of dissonance and friction between
Yeah.
me and something on the outside. So
Right.
other people's work,
Sure.
architecture,
Yeah.
some ridiculous right-wing politician, just something.
Right.
No, but it's
Yeah.
true. Like there
Yeah.
needs to be something
Some
that
friction.
gets
Yeah.
me going, that I need to feel usually a little bit of anger,
Yeah.
definitely an element of discomfort, and then
Yeah.
it's like, okay, well, there needs to be something that needs to be discovered. So what's going to be discovered, and how do I get started? I don't need to have a specific discovery goal. Like I don't need to unearth
Right.
something specific,
Right.
but there's definitely a gap,
Yeah.
and there's this gray area. What's my path through this gray area? And it's not up. It's horizontal. It's a
Sure.
landscape. It's a field, right? I don't see it as like I'm moving upwards towards something. It's
Mm.
I'm moving around and through things. Yeah.
And you mentioned other music or other pieces. So for me, sometimes it's like, wow, that's a great piece. Like, or sometimes I'm like, oh, this is a really good idea. What if it was done in this way? Do you find yourself doing that? Or is it like, does
Uh,
sometimes like a piece make you angry and you're like,
yes.
I have to
It's more that.
respond. It's more that, really. Wow.
It's
Okay.
more
I'm
that. It's
usually
more.
just envious. I'm like, oh, I've got to try to create something as great or
Mm.
beautiful as this. But yeah, you're sort of like, no, I disagree.
Yeah, usually it's because I disagree.
Yeah.
And it
Yeah.
tends to be in like a dance piece or maybe a theater piece or
Sure.
something. It
Sure.
tends to not be in the same exact medium that I'm going to
Right.
be working in, which
Okay.
I think is good.
Yeah. Yeah. So
Um,
yeah.
but then the research process is really nice because
Mm.
you tend to meet the work of other people who've already kind of questioned
Yeah.
similar things. And it's like,
Yeah.
okay, great. Well, you've
Yeah.
already done lots of work for me,
Mm.
actually. So
Mm.
you've done all this thinking and feeling out, and
Mm.
you've reached this conclusion. Okay,
Mm.
great. So from that point, okay, where do I go? And so
Right.
I really see it as this kind of shared knowledge, this exchange
Yeah.
through with people who actually probably are completely unaware that I'm having this exchange
It's
with
true.
them and their work.
Right. Right. Yeah.
But for me, it feels very, very real and present. Like I kind
Yeah.
of surround myself, as you can
Yeah.
see, with lots of objects, and
Right.
I gather lots of things.
Yeah.
And I have lots of images around me.
Yeah.
I have all these kind of pocket sculptures on my desk
Yeah.
that I pick up along the way. I
Yeah.
find it really important that I'm able to touch things, hold
Yeah.
things, see
Yeah.
things in person as much as possible, which is difficult for someone who has a body that kind of
Yeah.
sleeps a lot and is ill a lot.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
um, but yeah, I do accumulate a lot of stuff because of
Yeah.
that aspect. Essentially, I experienced an ear trauma, and the following from that, I was really struggling to understand speech. And but it also, and obviously, I was told to stop playing
Sure.
violin, stop making music, no
Sure.
headphone use. But it also kind of cycled in some issues I was having with my body, and
Sure.
then also went into to a point where I was struggling to speak and walk, and I kept having episodes that looked like I was having a stroke, and it was really like my whole body was almost overridden somehow.
Yeah. Yeah.
And just lots and lots of migraines, and my fatigue cycle was very, very intense. And
Yeah.
so actually, I couldn't really, I felt like had been I was being like submerged, I guess.
Yeah.
Like I
Underwater.
couldn't reach to the extent of my cognition, but also of my being.
Yeah.
And so initially, the label Essay Recordings, now
Hmm.
known as Squirrel,
Hmm.
offered me to make a piece which was Cochlear, which is on
Hmm.
here, or Cochlear.
Cochlea. Yeah.
Um, and that was a nice offering because it was the first time someone went, "What would you like to make?" You
Right.
know,
Yeah.
and it really felt like a hand reaching
Yeah.
uh, because I was really kind of at sea in my whole system,
Sure.
um, and I went, do you know what? I normally make lots of things, process them. And
Yeah.
here I really wanted to work with acoustic instruments
Right.
that sounded
Yeah.
like electronic sounds or
Right.
kind of synthesized sounds, but I wanted to work with acoustic sources and
Hmm.
really that the impetus for that was that
Hmm.
the tinnitus I hear obviously
Yeah.
sounds like what I'm used to hearing as sine waves,
Right.
but obviously is produced by a mechanical,
Yeah.
a biological
Sure.
creature that lives in my head, right?
Yes. Creature. Creature. Yeah. That's the scientific. The scientific. Yeah.
Very,
Right.
very scientific.
Hmm.
No, but it kind of is, it's a little
Hmm.
snail.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um,
It
yeah.
it does it does. So that kind of brings us all to then this idea that the sensory lab or sensory cell lab in New York, you went there as part of this album too to kind of sort of do some research, but also I wasn't quite clear on this. Some of the sounds we're actually hearing are some of these recordings of your tinnitus.
Yes. So essentially, so after the single,
Yeah.
I got an amazing Arts Council grant in the
Great.
UK, we're very, very lucky. We have
Great.
access to a lot more grant opportunities than in
Sure.
the US.
Sure.
And I used that to start thinking about making prototype instruments
Sure.
and objects that were kind
Mm-hmm.
of taken from forms of the middle and inner ear.
Mm-hmm.
And I was meeting with glass makers
Mm-hmm.
and I guess percussion
Mm-hmm.
instrument makers. So working
Mm-hmm.
with
Mm-hmm.
kind of copper oxides and things like this.
Wow.
Um, and so I had kind of developed these prototypes,
Mm-hmm.
but I hadn't yet made any music. It was kind of
Right.
just these objects that were kind of around me. Um, and and so I kind of put that aside for a while, and I started looking into a lot of scientific papers.
Okay.
And someone's name who kept coming up was Jim
Mm-hmm.
Hudspeth, and so
Great.
who runs the lab
Yeah.
in New York,
Yeah.
Rockefeller University. And um, the the language that he was using really was what drew me to
Mm-hmm.
want to reach out.
Mm-hmm.
He was making reference to like this idea that we have a reverse piano kind of in our ear, and that it kind of plays itself. And
Mm-hmm.
I found that his approach to being interviewed and to writing
Mm-hmm.
was more accessible. Like it didn't feel like it was for the scientific community. It felt like actually,
Yeah.
we can maybe ascertain
Yeah.
what is happening, in these research spaces. So I
Right.
wrote to him. He responded 2 days later, and 2
Yeah.
months later, I was invited to come and give a
Great.
talk on my weird prototypes. And in
Yeah.
exchange, I got this wonderful tour of the lab and got to meet with individual biophysicists and also the resident musicologist Lana Norris, who I did pink noise with.
Right.
But yeah, and so part of the exploration of the lab was showing me the different experiment chambers, I should say,
Sure.
not experimental chambers, but I
Yeah.
guess.
Right.
And obviously they work with gerbil and gecko cochlears,
Sure.
and everything is obviously scaled to match
Sure. Yeah. Much
that.
smaller. Yeah.
So the anechoic chambers are like
Oh,
this
they're
big.
very small. Okay. But they're anechoic chambers for geckos. That's
Yeah, for
interesting.
doing
Yeah.
the testing, and they have
Yeah.
these towers of equipment. I don't exactly know what they are, but
Mm-hmm.
and then sorry, and your question specifically was about some of the recordings that we hear. So
Right.
if you have the vinyl edition
Right.
of
Right.
my project, it
Right.
makes a little bit more sense because
Mhm.
left ear opens side A,
Side
and
A,
right
yeah.
ear is essentially side B.
Right.
And my reason for that was playing on this idea of stereo and
Sure.
also kind of immediately, I guess, discrediting the kind of audiophile phenomena of, there is such a thing as perfect, pure sound and pure and perfect listening,
Sure. Yeah.
which is as I discovered at one of my
Yeah.
interviews with one of the biophysicists, is the ear just adds so much distortion anyway
Yeah.
that we all hear completely differently, and no matter what sound and how perfect
Yeah.
what you've created is being put out, your ear will just completely do what it wants with it. So So we had worked together on a score for a stop. It's called Stop Motion. It's a film,
Right.
feature film. So I was going to say for a stop motion film, but it's
Film. Yeah.
literally
No. No. It's
stop
stop
motion.
motion is the yeah.
And so we already
Mhm.
knew that we understood each other. Again, talking about
Yeah.
translation and finding a common language, it's
Sure.
really important when you work with other people
Right.
because they're like, on paper you might seem like the best pair, but actually in
Hmm.
practice,
Yeah.
if you really understand
Hmm.
each other with
Hmm.
the types of language you use, because obviously
Sure.
I seem to talk a lot about the body rather
Sure.
than
Yeah.
sound,
Yeah.
um, and like color and texture,
Yeah.
but probably not the way that a musician is used to hearing.
Sure.
But Gwen has a massive background in film as well, and so
Hmm.
I think that there was this interesting overlap.
Yeah.
So having worked together in these sessions,
Yeah.
I invited her along to do
Hmm.
some more,
Great.
basically.
Great. Great.
And so we did actually just run it as I think it was probably, I don't know, 4 hours or something.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and we recorded it with Eve Morris, who now works at Air
Mm.
Studios, actually, who's a
Great.
wicked
Yeah.
engineer.
Great.
And we just there was a lot of talking. And
Yeah.
and then eventually there'd be some playing, and there'd be a
Play.
lot more talking, and then eventually there'd be
Play.
some playing.
Yeah. So it wasn't just
So
4 hours of like sonics just happening. Yeah. It was.
no, there was also a lot of glass breaking and laughter.
Good. Yeah. Well, hopefully it wasn't any of the equipment that was breaking. It was things you
Well,
were.
no, it's just
Yeah.
my objects. That's
Your
fine.
object. Yeah.
Yes. Uh,
Well, that's another question I would have then too, is what were some of the sounds we were hearing? So obviously when I listen to this piece, I'm hearing double bass and I'm hearing, the sounds of that, but I'm
and
also hearing
yeah,
all these other sounds that I couldn't readily identify. So what were
yeah.
some of the other things that we were hearing?
Well, actually, you're almost exclusively hearing violin and double bass.
Well, good.
Almost
That's
exclusively.
amazing then. That's
Which
amazing.
is
Great.
amazing. Yeah. And
Yes.
and this and
Yeah.
this is what I find really exciting is like,
Hmm.
okay, fine, we all understand
Hmm.
how we're meant to listen and
Right.
how we're meant to play to
Hmm.
these classical, instruments.
Sure. Right.
So how many of us have heard a double bass outside of the context of like a jazz band or like creating loads of like rumbles on
Or
stage,
yeah.
as part of an orchestra?
Or like doubling the cello part or an
Right.
octave below it.
It,
Yeah.
it's quite unusual actually for us to just like, okay, what is just the double bass if we
Right.
explore the whole thing?
Right.
What sounds exist there? I
Yeah.
mean, you also have to think of the proportions of it
Yeah.
next to quite a petite, woman,
Yeah.
and how
Hmm.
like physically how the double bass is going to sit in her body
Right.
will mean that it resonates differently,
Yeah.
which is also something I'd not really thought about.
Oh,
And how
less
like
impedance. Yeah.
right. And like yes, absolutely. Bone to
Hmm.
wood,
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
then obviously the dimensions of her hands.
Yeah.
Um, she's going to bring a different sound out of it than a
Absolutely.
different body.
Absolutely.
And so really we were like, okay, what are all the sounds that we can
Yeah. Yeah.
like today that we feel like we're going to find? What are
Right.
they?
Yeah.
And so we just went looking and as far as I know,
Mhm.
you can't actually perform the piece. So that's kind of the trick, isn't it? It's
Yes.
like
Okay.
I'm sampling all these acoustic sounds and I'm really working with them as they were produced, but then I'm lining them up vertically,
Yeah.
right? I'm creating alternative timbres by
Yeah.
combining them. So
Hmm.
technically they're from a real source and I haven't messed with them,
Right.
but
Yeah.
you probably couldn't play it. I don't know. I haven't tried.
And
I
then
want to.
and then the whole thing feels very organic anyways. So it doesn't feel like this kind of that's the one thing about the studio. It's like it's an imaginary place. I mean, it's not. It's a real place. You paid for studio hours, but the things that the world you can
Proximity.
create, yeah,
Yeah.
the world you
Yeah.
can create
This is
is.
something that we did. We actually had
Hmm.
many microphones. I can't remember how
Okay.
many,
Sure.
but obviously I had a microphone
Hmm.
facing my instrument. Gwen
Right.
had one facing
Yeah.
two or three, I think, around her double bass. We
Right.
had one at the piano,
Hmm.
just
Hmm.
to see if we got any resonance. Then we had a
Sure.
couple in the room. Then we
Hmm.
had some on the ground that were pointing us at
Right.
objects that had their own resonance. And so actually the reason why sometimes you're not too sure what you're hearing, is because I'm moving between these different microphones and I'm combining them. And sometimes I actually preferred using the microphone that was pointing me, even though she was playing,
Right,
just because it
right.
did
Yeah,
something, tonally.
yeah.
Um,
Sometimes
and
the good violin mic, the good violin mic is the bad double bass mic, but it actually is the good double bass mic because of the
but
distance
also
and
it's
the
pointing the
yeah.
wrong direction.
Right,
And
right,
technically in a studio, you've kind of accounted for as many reflections as you can to
right,
kind of make
right.
it as
Yeah,
dense as possible.
yeah,
Um, so it's almost like you're crawling around like the very fabric of the instruments. You've got the rosin,
hmm,
right? The stickiness of that. You've got the
yeah,
metal kind
right,
of spiral of the string. You've got
right,
the aged lacquered wood, but then you've
right,
got the
right.
kind of exposed bridge, and then you've
Yeah,
got bits of rubber, and
hmm.
so it's almost like I'm trying to sound out the very fabric of what it's made from. And same with my violin, I do the same, yeah.
And it illuminated one thing for me. What you just mentioned is this idea of distance. And one thing that I really enjoyed about just the sonics of what I was hearing is that some things felt very close, and sort of I could hear the rosin on the bow, and it was very in my face. And then
Mm.
there was these phantoms in the background. And so I'm assuming then that's you switching between these different microphones and distances.
Yeah.
And that was really
Yeah.
exciting.
Oh, thank you. Yeah,
Hmm.
as a form, it was quite playful putting that piece together. Again, it's
Sure.
something that just kind of came
Mm.
out
Yeah.
just from listening, and
Right.
I felt like it almost happened.
Mm.
Um, but obviously, it's so edited,
Yeah.
like all the rhythms, everything. As if you
Yeah.
saw my sessions,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
Um, but the thing that I liked about the distance, it made me kind of picture these ears kind of hearing between different rehearsal spaces. I think
Right.
for a while my terrible working title was just like rehearsals, But
Rehearsals.
this
Yeah.
idea of, you walk down a corridor and you have these kind of giant halls, but then you've got damp practice spaces and you
Right.
kind of hear
Yeah. The
like a
Ives
door
in,
like
like somebody's playing one
half
piece and then
open.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I kind of liked that.
Yeah.
It's kind of vertigo inducing, which is why
Yeah.
also
Yeah.
I kind of liked, well, for, like the notion of it. I don't know if it
Yeah.
actually is
Right.
for
Yeah.
an
Yeah.
extent, but
Yeah.
just the notion of kind of you're entering and exiting all these different types of acoustic spaces
Mm-hmm.
very rapidly,
Mm-hmm.
um, but it kind of becomes its own
Yeah.
alternative, I don't know, object or something.
Well, this has been fantastic. Let us know where we can find more about you, about your music, and then where we can go to listen to or buy. There's an LP version of Oceans of Azimuth. Or
Yeah, so
Oceans on Azimuth. Sorry, excuse me.
there is a record.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's a vinyl. You can get it on my Bandcamp.
Mhm.
Um, other than that, you can download it.
Mhm.
If
Mhm.
funds are difficult for you right now, you can also
Mhm.
email me and I'll happily send you
Fantastic.
a link, because that's only right.
Right.
Um, and then yeah, moving forward, it's just about wanting to work more on installations,
Yeah.
continue pushing my sculptures and
Yeah.
taking those into spaces, and
Mhm.
hopefully
Mhm.
slowly making my way towards forming a tinnitus archive. So
Yeah.
that'll
Fantastic.
happen.
Awesome. Thanks to Lola for sharing her time and music with us. If you enjoyed this episode, please check out other episodes in the series, and as always, like, subscribe, or leave a comment on your preferred podcasting app. I'm Dr. Doug Bielmeyer, and this has been The Process.